Welcome to BYJU'S IAS. We are delighted to be back with you with yet another edition of Weekly Review of International Affairs. Our effort, as always, is to curate an edition of events, issues for you who are preparing for civil service examinations. Our focus always is on events which are emerging and are likely to impact on the international relations globally, particularly focusing on Indian national interest. And this time what we are going to do is to look at a country next door in our neighborhood, Bangladesh, which often remains neglected or is in news for wrong reasons, for illegal infiltration from that country to our country. Tempers are raised because of criticism of one side or the other side of policies of the one country or the other country. And the other country which is going to be looked at this week is Egypt, which was very important in the days of non-aligned movement, one of the founding countries which walked step to step with India in the days of Cold War. But recently it has been not very much in the news ever since the Arab Spring and its petering out. But recently what has happened is that there has been an accident in the Suez Canal which has suddenly drawn international attention towards what can happen to the interruption of supply chains if something of this kind happens in a country which is almost forgotten. We will also try to have a look at mankind's fight against coronavirus pandemic, which seems to be not going away at all, despite the vaccines and all, and maybe what kind of violence continues to threaten international peace and stability on the African continent. Till a few years back, when anyone talked about Bangladesh, it was treated as a basket case, a failed state, a bankrupt state which was going downhill all the way. At times it was hit hard by natural calamities like cyclones. At times there were shortages and famines. At times there was law and order which was disturbed. And at times there were apprehensions about the inroads that were being made in this country by the Islamic fanatical elements. There were times also when the world thought that Bangladesh could not pull up its socks and take its rightful place according to its size and its potential. What people forget that Bangladesh is the 7th most populous nation in the world. It is very, very significant and is very densely populated. It also is the 3rd largest nation with the concentration of Muslims. So as a Muslim nation, it is very important in international politics. As a populous nation, it is very important in international politics. It has a 4,000 kilometer boundary with India. It shares its boundaries with 5 Indian states, Mizoram, Meghalaya, Assam, Tripura and West Bengal. And it is very proximate. A very narrow corridor in Siliguri separates it from Nepal and Bhutan and takes it almost to the border of China. So, and if you take the maritime boundary of Bangladesh, it is in a very dominating position in the northern tip of the Bay of Bengal, where you have an uninterrupted flow or to the Andaman Nicobar Islands, the whole of east coast of India, and also to Myanmar and Thailand. So this position of Bangladesh is important intrinsically. Population, geographical location, and also let us not forget that the whole world is amazed when it reviews that how much progress Bangladesh has made in the past 50 years. Before we go to the progress made by Bangladesh in the past 50 years, probably a little historical background is necessary. Bangladesh was a very populous part of Pakistan. It was called East Pakistan when the partition took place. But the political power was concentrated by the Punjabis and the Pathans in the West Pakistan. The army dominated it. The army was dominated by Pathans and Punjabis. And the Bangladeshis today, who were then the citizens of East Pakistan, where East Bengal, were treated as second-class citizens. Some of the educated Bengalis, the doctors, the engineers, the scientists, bureaucrats did play a role in the Pakistani government, but they were discriminated against. I think the very important thing which we should remember about Bangladesh is that Bangladesh is a striking case, even as East Pakistan. It was a striking case of disproving the two-nation theory. It proved that religion could not keep people together if other things divided them bitterly. In this case, it was language. There was a language movement to have a proper place for the Bengali language in the Pakistan in the early 50s, which was crushed down. And this is the original martyrs of the Bangladesh liberation movement. They are still remembered very, very warmly and gratefully. Because the population was very large, whenever, if at all, elections were going to take place, the Pakistani ruling elite, the Punjabi and Pathans, realized that the political power will move out of their hands because by sheer numbers, the people belonging to East Pakistan, East Bengal, would have the dominant role to play. And this is exactly what happened in 1970s. When the elections took place, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and his Awami League party won a majority, but the West Pakistanis were not prepared to do so. And what happened was, there was a very ambitious politician there, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was working closely at one time with Field Marshal Ayub Khan. He also had his ties with Yahya Khan, the general who had succeeded Tika Khan a little later. And he had built up an axis of alliances between Pakistan and People's Republic of China, and had tried to bring into this axis the regime in Indonesia, Sukarno's regime, which was having a problem at that stage with India for a variety of reasons. We needn't go into that here. But the problem was, the Pakistani ruling elite and the army thought they could dismiss the results of the elections of 1970. But Sheikh Mujib was a very charismatic orator, very popular leader, and he did something very clever. On the 26th March, just before midnight, when he was arrested, he declared the independence of Bangladesh. He was arrested, whisked away to a jail in West Pakistan. Nobody knew what he was going to suffer. But the people of East Pakistan started calling themselves Bangladesh and rose in revolt, especially the youngsters, the young villagers, the students, the intelligentsia, and so on. Then came a period of almost a year, ruthless genocidal repression of Bangla population in East Pakistan, which was, of course, the Bangladeshis called themselves liberated, independent after Sheikh Mujib's statement. Pakistanis continued to treat it as an internal colony, and this annihilation of our people created revulsion all over the world. Especially strong were the sentiments in India, where there were ties of flesh and blood and language and culture between East Bengal and West Bengal. So what happened was, when Pakistani atrocities continued unabated, a large influx of refugees from East Bengal came to West Bengal and through the other parts of India. There were billions of refugees seeking shelter in India, trying to save their lives. At the same time, the youngsters came to India, took shelter and support, went back to fight the Pakistani oppressors across the border again. And India was put under great pressure. It was almost an aggression by proxy on India to destabilize its polity, to destabilize its economy. And Mrs. Gandhi very farsightedly first tried to control the crisis by diplomacy. There was a very active campaign of public diplomacy taken place. But when this did not have any result, Indians, for humanitarian reasons, decided to give help to the Mukti Wahini, the armed band of freedom fighters from Bangladesh. And this ultimately succeeded in provoking Pakistan into launching a war against India. Pakistan opened the front on the western side, but the Indian Air Force, Navy, Army acquitted themselves brilliantly. And after a very short war, Pakistan was totally defeated, and the Pakistani army had to bite the bullet, sign a surrender agreement in Dhaka. And more than 90,000 plus soldiers surrendered and were taken prisoners of war by the Indians, and Bangladesh was a liberated country. Now, Bangladesh became liberated, but it was in severe stress because the infrastructure had been destroyed by the Pakistani armed forces during the war, the intelligentsia had been annihilated, the students had been murdered. There had been so much disturbance that Bangladesh would have to wait for a while to get back on its feet. Unfortunately, Bangladesh did not get this time to recover and replenish its resources. In 75, Sheikh Mujib was murdered in a coup d'etat where the army took a prominent role, and his whole family was killed except Sheikh Hasina and her family, who were not present in the country at that time. After that, the history of Bangladesh has been a very turbulent one. We refer to the natural calamities, we refer to ups and downs in politics. There were several coups, several assassinations. So Begum Khalida, whose husband was an army officer, once an ex-president, he was killed in a coup again. But so principally there are two leaders who have exchanged positions of power ever since the early 90s, Begum Khalida Zia and Sheikh Hasina. In the past 10-12 years, Sheikh Hasina has been the dominant, single most important leader in Bangladesh. Now, there have been criticisms of even Sheikh Mujib that he was assassinated because some people were very happy about his turning Bangladesh from a multi-party country, secular country, socialist country to an authoritarian single-party country, and also imposing restrictions on media, etc. Other people would say that no, this was engineered by Pakistan, who wanted to play the army and say that Sheikh Mujib had broken the country into two. He was not to be treated as a patriot. And there were some people who had collaborated with the Pakistani army army, wanted to say that they had done it for genuine patriotic reasons or to save the integrity of their country, and they probably wanted to defend their past, which was almost a traitor-like past in Bangladesh freedom struggle, to side with Pakistan. So in 75, when Sheikh Mujib was murdered, it was a big trauma. 71 was a big event. 75 was definitely a tragic trauma. And after that, political instability followed. Once Pakistan got out of Bangladesh, the progress of Bangladesh has been far better than Pakistan, and in some cases, much better than its larger neighbor next door, India. Today, when we look at it, Bangladesh is registering a rate of economic growth, which, including China, has been the fastest in Asia before the coronavirus hit it. It was about 7%. And experts speculate that even today, after the coronavirus hit, Bangladesh would probably register an economic growth rate of 3 to 3.5%, which is very, very remarkable. The Bangladesh has today the control of the second largest textile industry in the world after China. So it is the ready-made garment industry all over the world depends very largely on Bangladesh. The Bangladesh has performed brilliantly in the social development indicators. The average age of a Bangladeshi today is 3 or more than what it is in India. The literacy rate in Bangladesh is 98%. There were in 1971 only 3% of women who were part of the labor force. Today, a couple of years back, when I say today is a couple of years back, the percentage of women in labor force is 36%. The infant mortality rate has come down, disease control has taken place, and how this has happened is very interesting. Bangladesh was never shy of accepting assistance from anybody, from India, from China, from European Union, from Japan, from anybody. And the other remarkable contribution was there were some Bangladeshis, expat Bangladeshis in UK, in America, who came back to their country and played a very important role in rebuilding it. The NGOs have played a very good role in reproductive health, in women's empowerment, in literacy, in vaccination, etc., in primary level medical health care. Also, there has been remarkable progress made in microfinance. So, Muhammad Yunus was a gentleman who proposed the microfinance scheme and launched his Grameen Bank. And the big banks were reluctant to give finance or to loans to small entrepreneurs, to women, to housewives. And this Grameen Bank was a model which not only got Muhammad Yunus a Nobel Prize, but he also empowered the entrepreneurs in Bangladesh to a very large extent. So if we look at it, all these things, we suddenly realize that Bangladesh is not a country without problems, but Bangladesh has today done very, very well, and nobody thinks that it is going to go downhill. Obviously, it has problems of crime, it has problems of slums, it has problems of great economic disparity between the very rich and the very poor, especially in the larger cities. But by and large, the lot of an average Bangladeshi has improved. Two things which need to be mentioned in this context is that Bangladesh still continues to accept aid from all sources, which creates a bit of a problem, because if you have Saudi petrodollars, you have inevitably the Wahhabi Islam coming in to a certain extent. You continue to be a secular country, but Islam is a state religion. Sheikh Hasina started off by being neutral to all parties, and she has been very, very harsh on people who murdered her father, the family who collaborated with the Pakistani army during the freedom struggle. So she has brought to book lots of jihadi elements, lot of terrorist element, a lot of people who had been supported and sponsored by the Pakistani intelligence agencies. But sadly, she, in her quest for power and eliminating all challengers, has had to make some compromises with bodies like Hifazat-e-Islam, which is again a hardcore fundamentalist body. And incidentally, ironically, when Mr. Modi was touring Bangladesh recently, the riots which took place and the disturbances which were engineered were by the Hifazat-e-Islam. And this party and the leadership seem to have a close relationship with Sheikh Hasina. So you have a problem of supping with the devil, as they say in the English phrase. The second problem, which is very important about Bangladesh, which we can't forget, is that both Sheikh Hasina and Begum Khalida are old women. They are in their 70s. And they have not prepared a successor. There is no second line of command. There is no party organization. So what next for Bangladesh when they say goodbye, they hang up their boots, they prepare the way for somebody else? And we talked about the economic disparities. A couple of years back, there was very shocking incident of violence in Dhaka when children belonging to the upper crust elite had been brainwashed, came back, took part in suicide missions and killed a lot of people in a coffee shop in a very, very tony neighborhood of Dhaka. So there are these issues, environmental issues. Bangladesh is one country which faces a terrible threat of submergence and internal displacement if the climate change raises the level of the seas. So they are not out of the woods. But at the same time, none of us can afford to overlook that Bangladesh is a country which is important in the context of Asia, particularly in the context of South Asia. And even this time, when the Golden Jubilee celebrations were taking place, except Pakistan, everybody was there. And obviously, Pakistan could not be there. But when we talk of SAARC or when we talk of the ASEAN countries, Bangladesh is a country which provides a bridge. Lots of agreements signed between India and Bangladesh during Prime Minister Modi's visit. There was one about peaceful use of nuclear energy. There were bridges were built. New direct trains were announced. Cooperation in vaccine has been remarkable. But all these things must be analyzed in the context of what China can do in terms of promising aid, promising technological aid, also trying to make inroads to get secure access to the Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean. Chatgaon is the second largest city in Bangladesh and a very flourishing port since medieval days. So there is traffic from not only India but China moving towards Southeast Asia, for which Bangladesh is important. So we keep a totality of Bangladesh in mind and not restrict ourselves to the issue of illegal immigrants from Bangladesh to India. This is something which is of importance. What happened in Egypt, to be specific, in the Suez Canal, was very unexpected. There was a Japanese-owned, it was called Ever Given, run by a Taiwanese company called Evergreen. And the crew of the ship was entirely, 24-man crew was Indian, and was carrying cargo to Netherlands in Europe. It was trying to negotiate the narrow Suez Canal, held by two tugs, as is the custom, but it got stuck diagonally in the Suez Canal. What created a problem was that this was such a large ship, almost as tall as the Empire State Building in the United States of America, which at one time was the tallest building in the world, almost half a kilometer long, laden with 200,000 tons of cargo, and it blocked the way for ships coming from west to east, east to west. By now, almost 250 to 300 ships are waiting in a queue on both sides for this ship to be lifted, cleared, and the passage to be cleared. The world has been made conscious that how delicately is its supply chain balanced. If something like this happens, which has happened in Suez Canal, fuel going from Middle East to East Asian countries, products coming from East Asian countries to Europe are blocked immediately. Now, this ship was carrying Creta, Hyundai cars, it was carrying medical vaccines, it was carrying pharmaceutical drugs, it was carrying fuel. Now, it is not only what the ship was carrying. The other ships were also carrying cargo of the similar kind on both sides. Now, what happens is, nobody knows how long this will take to clear this ship. Now, there are two or three other issues which we must, because we said we will focus on Egypt, because Suez Canal is a matter of pride for Egyptians. Ever since it was nationalized in 1956 and Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser, supported by India and Soviet Union, then had looked up to the American-French intervention and emerged victorious. It is a matter of pride. It is a matter of their identity. Not only identity and pride, it earns $5 billion per year in revenue. So a major chunk of the foreign exchange earning of Egypt depends on Suez Canal. Now, Suez Canal was a very narrow canal. It was not a very deep canal when it was originally made. The traffic was not so high. In recent years, it has been dredged, it has been deepened, it has been broadened. But obviously, now the questions are being raised that despite all these improvements, was it safe to let a ship of this size pass through the canal? There also are questions of the liability. Who's responsible for this? Now, that's where Egypt comes in. Egypt under President Sisi had been trying to project that when this canal was being deepened and broadened, that it would provide employment and regenerate economic development. And he was holding out promise that within 3, 4, 5 years' time, the revenue earnings from $5 billion will go up to $13, $14 billion. It has not happened. The canal has been dredged, broadened, widened, but the revenue has increased from $5.5 billion to $7 billion. So it's been disappointing. Also, there have been accusations of corruptions of the Egyptian government, just as this ship tragedy was being faced by the rest of the world. They were trying to fix liabilities and responsibilities and insurance claims. A train crash took place in Egypt in which more than 32 people died. And as if this was not enough, a major apartment building collapsed in Cairo. Now, there have been buildings collapsing in Egypt. There is a blind rush to have urbanization and development. There have been substandard constructions, and these are not new. So some people have said the Egyptian experts, pilots who are supposed to guide big ships through this canal are probably not as skilled, not as trained. The Egyptians on their part come out with an excuse that there were particularly strong winds blowing when the ship was passing. There was no control over that, and it was an accident. So whether it was a human error, whether it was strong winds, whether it was incompetent piloting, whether it was negligence on the part of the Egyptian authorities to provide passage for such a big ship is one part. The problem remains. The Japanese owners apologized profusely and said that all efforts are being made to clear the passage for the other ships, but it is easier said than done because there are technical issues. If this ship is to be lifted back, it may put a stress on the hulk of the ship, and the ship might break, which might be even more disastrous. Then they might like to lighten the ship, as the experts say, by removing containers from this ship and put them to other vessels and get them out so the ship can be lifted and done. Now, Egypt does not have the wherewithal to do this. The Americans have made an offer. They have the technology and they can probably do that. But once they do that, there are international implications that there would be some kind of a neo-colonialist, neo-imperialist dimension added to it, that Egypt, which took pride in running the Suez Canal, cannot effectively manage this international waterway, and it will have to be done by a consortium of international experts and so on. So there are issues. Now, also the problem is, what do we do right away? So if these ships which are in the queue, those which are in the canal can't turn back. They are caught in a traffic jam like in a flyover on a highway. But the ships which were approaching the entry and the exit of the Suez Canal can turn back and take a longer route. And the longer route adds thousands of dollars in costs of fuel, and it adds days to the journey. And especially in the corona pandemic days, the crews of these ships have not been home for almost a year. How long they can put up with the psychological stress. And also the area near Red Sea, near Somalia, is infested by pirates, and the pirates have been emboldened to target these ships. So the Americans have been requested to move a fleet up to provide some protection to these, but obviously not each ship can be provided an escort, a patrol to take it safely along the most dangerous Somali coastline. In addition, there is another problem. The problem of insurance and liabilities and paying back for the loss suffered by the other vessels. And also there is some lack of transparency in international shipping. The ship is owned by Japanese, flies a different flag of convenience, Peruvian or something, operated by a Taiwanese company, crew is Indian, cargo is from one place going to another place. So the insurance claims will take a long time to settle, and this would be a kind of a crisis which is a warning bell which reminds the world that how much of its international trade is interdependent, and the supply chain hit by coronavirus can be hit by accidents which may be man-made, which may be negligent, which may be genuine. So I think this is a moment of truth for Egyptian government, of President Sisi. It is a moment of truth for the rest of the world to face the fact that if the international trade is interdependent, there has to be an anticipation of problems like this, whether it's a virus or whether it's an accident or an extreme weather event, and cope with it jointly, collaboratively. Only a few months back, one would have thought that after the vaccines had appeared and the vaccination program was on, that the mankind had conquered the coronavirus. But now it seems that it was a fallacy. it was a mistaken belief. It was probably the arrogance of scientists. The second and the third waves of coronavirus are proving to be far more infectious, far more contagious, and in certain cases, more mortality rates are also increasing. The worst affected countries are the ones which are supposed to be the developed ones, where literacy levels are high, like the United States of America, where hundreds of millions of people have been infected and the people dying have crossed close to 400,000. After that, the second worst hit country is Brazil, which again is by no stretch of imagination a poor, underdeveloped country. President Bolsonaro's bullheaded attitude towards poo-pooing the coronavirus, despite himself being infected, has caused great havoc to his country. He was delayed in importing vaccines, in inaugurating a vaccination program, and still continues to be bothered about other things than the coronavirus. The infrastructure in Brazil is on the verge of collapsing. The deadly variants P1 and P2 of the coronavirus, which have originated in Brazil, have created such a threat that its neighbors have been forced to close their borders. Whether it is Argentina, they have closed their borders with Brazil. And there are strict restrictions on Brazilians taking off and traveling from this country or getting back into that country. Now, it is not only Brazil and United States of America. The third worst country is Mexico. Now, the problem is that the total number of infections and the total number of mortalities, almost 1/4 in the entire world, come from these three countries. Give and take some additions from Chile and Argentina as well. Now, why is this so? And there are other problems which are very disconcerting. Americans had the resources. They bought the vaccines in large quantities. The vaccination program there has not progressed as well, although President Biden has given it a top priority. There is resistance because of the Trump's legacy, you might say so. People are not very happy taking a vaccination shot. They don't forget about the vaccination shot. They don't even want to make slightest change in their daily lifestyles. They refuse to wear masks. They refuse to maintain social distancing. They want to congregate together for Thanksgiving, to Easter, to weekend sea beaches, their holidays and so on. Now, one issue is genuine. They say that, look, economic activity cannot come to a standstill. Not everybody can work from home. So there has to be a balance between the policies for lockout and the policies for economic recovery. But the fact remains that you cannot have an either-or choice. Both things have to be done together. And one other reason which needs to be pointed out, in India, which has a population much larger than these countries, it is 1.35 billion. So far, so good. We haven't had mortality as high, although the numbers are large because our population is very, very large. Numbers are very large, but our population is younger, and they say that Europe and America have a larger problem because the average age of their population is older, they have comorbidities, and they are reluctant to make changes in their lifestyles. Germany is facing the same problem. Spain and Portugal are having the same problem. Italy is having the same problem. So Europe and America are one case, but they are forcing us to think about the equity. These are the countries which monopolize the first supply of vaccines, and when the vaccine manufacturing companies could not fulfill their commitments, then they started putting restrictions. Will not let you export, will not let you do this. Shouldn't we think that when there is a calamity like this, which is a common threat to the humankind, till there is one infection, nobody can say that I am safe from the infection. So shouldn't there have been a concerted policy, like there was to find out where the infection originated, to combat with the infection and follow a policy of certain equity, that even the poorer countries get protection against the disease? Then there is an issue related to this, which is the vaccine diplomacy. There is a Soviet vaccine, there is a Chinese vaccine, there is an Indian vaccine, there are several American vaccines, the Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, the British vaccine, Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Now Brazil is trying to make a vaccine of its own. It will take some time before it has clinical trials and tests. But shouldn't have there been a concentrated, coordinated effort and vaccine manufacture, supply, rather than scoring browning points and saying that, like the Chinese say, you can't enter or exit out of China unless you have a Chinese vaccine inoculation. Or you give Chinese or Russian vaccines to other people and say, look, we have been so philanthropic, we have prioritized the poorer nations more than our own citizens. So these are stresses and strains which will not disappear. This is not the first time the problem of equity is creating such havoc. The rich nations versus the poor nation are coming. So we have to think hard about this, that will mankind learn from this experience and in future behave in a more sensible, coordinated manner. That is all we have for you this week. Look forward to meeting you next week when we'll come back with another edition of the weekly review of international affairs, which will focus not only on these issues of equity in international relations, common problems which mankind has to face together, and also coordinated diplomatic activity to cope with challenges which are complex, which need foresight, farsight, insight, and more important than anything else, where does India stand in this? India will have to take several difficult decisions in coming weeks. Is not only COVID vaccine virus, it is not only the impact of the accident in the Suez Canal, it probably will have to worry about its tightrope balancing act about what is happening in Myanmar. But all about that next week. Till then, goodbye.